In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the ribbon sewing guide attachment to make your own custom quilt labels or labels that you can sew on the inside of any of your projects that you get to make at home. I think it's so important to label the things that we make. Either just a simple little handmade label on the inside of a project that we make, or anything from our name and our phone number that we sew on the inside of our bag so we don't lose it, or at least it's more likely to come back to us if it is lost. I also like to label any of my quilts with, made with love, and it may have my name at the end. Or if I'm working on a particularly hard thing, maybe I want to be a little funny and say this took forever, because maybe that quilt took me a little bit longer than I would have liked. So let's go over how to actually use the ribbon sewing guide attachment. This is the ribbon sewing guide attachment. There are 2 screws on either side. When we loosen these, it allows us to adjust. It goes all the way up to a full inch. So if I want to use any sort of webbing for a strap, I can even make it really skinny if I'm going to do, let's say I'm making a dress and I want to do a spaghetti strap on it, but I want to add some decorative stitching along the strap line. I can do some really nice tiny detailing there. And the way it attaches, it's going to keep it straight, so I don't have to worry about wobbling and making any sort of wavy lines when I want it to be nice and straight. This whole plate attaches to the front of your machine. There are positionings 1 and 2, and then there are also 2 different rubber shims that are going to be placed underneath this metal plate. The larger screw is going to go with the thicker shim. The shorter screw is going to go with the smaller shim. And those are going to be placed underneath this metal plate right here. So when we're sewing with twill tape, depending on the type of twill tape that we use, it may be thinner or thicker. But when we're using decorative stitches, we need to make sure that our fabric is stabilized. There's 3 different ways you can stabilize your fabric. I like to use Material Magic, which is this spray right here. It's a liquid stabilizer, and that's what I've done to this one here. As you can see, it's much harder and it's a little stiff. That's because it has the stabilizer in it. So I like to pre-soak my twill tape and then I just let it hang dry, and then once it's dried, that's ready to sew. If you don't have this, if you don't have the Material Magic, you can also use a tearaway stabilizer, or you can also cut individual strips on the back of your twill tape and stick a sticky stabilizer on the back of it like I did here. So as you can see, this is the front, and on the back I've measured the thickness or the width of my twill tape, and then I just stuck it on the back, so then I don't have to constantly replace new stabilizer underneath, and it's going to just stick on the back there and will stay back there until I'm done sewing. All right, now let's go to the machine and we're going to show you how to install it, and we're going to stitch out our labels. There are 3 major components that come with the ribbon sewing guide attachment. There's the plate, your rubber shim, and then the screw. Depending on the type of machine that you have is going to determine which shim you use and which screw you use, and also which placement you place the screw. On this particular machine, it's a 9mm machine, so I know I want the smaller shim with the shorter screw, and I want to place it in the second slot. So now let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to place my rubber shim over the hole on my stitch plate. Now I'm going to place the plate over the hole and attach it with the screw. When you screw it down, you don't have to screw it completely tight just yet. And the reason that is because not only do you have the ability to choose which position that you want to attach it in, you also have the ability to move it back and forth. You want this red dashed line to match up with that red arrow on your F foot. So now that I have my red dash and my red arrow aligned, now I'm going to tighten it up nice and tight. And you can even use your screwdriver just so that you know it's not going to move once we start stitching. Now that I have my stitch plate installed, I have to install my ribbon. Now, depending on the size of the ribbon is going to determine where you place this white guide here. And remember, we have this clear plastic guide here that's going to keep our ribbon from twisting as we sew. I like to push my ribbon a little past my feed dogs, just so that it has a nice, it has something to grab onto. Now that I have my ribbon centered under my foot, I'm going to lower my foot, and that's going to keep my ribbon in place so it doesn't move while I adjust the outside of my guide. So now that I have that nice and snug in there, I'm going to go ahead and tighten either side of my guide. And as you can see, it's nice and centered and ready to sew. Now let's go to the screen. I'm going to show you what we're going to type up. To pick out our fonts, we need to select the A button, which stands for alphabets. And now our different fonts are going to come up that are programmed on this machine. I want to select block. On my block function, I have the ability to stitch out my letters small or large. I want to stitch them out large, so I'm going to toggle back to the L. I also have the ability to do capital or lowercase. There are also symbols if you ever wanted to stitch out symbols or letters or numbers on multiple pages. On the top of your screen here, it's going to show you what font you're using, and then also remember, anytime there is a number dash another number, that means there's more than one page. So if you can't find what you're looking for, go ahead and turn your page here at the bottom and maybe you'll find it there. So I'm going to go back to my letters, and I'm going to go back to my capital. And now I want to type out I heart my Janome. So I'm going to pull up the I. Now I'm going to put a space in. There are 3 different spaces you can use. There's the small, medium, and large. I like to use the large because I like a little bit more space between each of the words that I'm saying, just so it doesn't get too cramped when you're using larger letters. So now there are no hearts on this one. So I know there is a heart under the decorative stitches. So I'm going to select my decorative stitch label. Then I'm going to go to my decorative stitch function here. And I'm going to turn my page till I get to 19. I'm going to select one heart. And now I'm going to go back to my fonts, select my block. And now I'm going to add one more space in between the heart to my. So now I'm going to type in my. I'm going to add another space. And then I'm going to add my Janome. And now I like to add spaces at the end of the phrase. So at the end of I heart Janome, I'm going to add 6 spaces at the end because I want to stitch out more than one label at a time. If I didn't add a space at the end, it would stitch out I heart my Janome and then stop. But because I want to add more than one, I'm going to add those spaces, and that creates a loop that it's just going to keep stitching out until I tell it to stop. So I'm going to add my 6 spaces at the end. And the reason I like to add 6 is because that gives me enough space to cut each label individually and tuck back those raw edges so that you don't see those raw edges and they're not too tight, and it gives it enough space between each phrase. Now let's go back to our preview screen to make sure that we're happy with the pattern that we've created. So I'm going to select the edit bar and check what I've stitched out. Now I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to exit out of that. But let's say I wanted to add another space, or I wanted to edit, or I want to edit whatever I've typed in. And if I want to do that, if you see this little blue cursor, that is where I'm going to add a new item. But if I don't want to add a new item here and I want to move it further up, I can move my arrow button here, and it's going to move my cursor up or down. So let's say I wanted to add another space between here. I could add one more here, and then it's going to bump down and allow me to add a new space or letter or whatever I wanted to edit. When I'm sewing decorative stitches, I like to stitch really slow. So I've moved my speed bar close to the 1 arrow so that it stitches out really slowly, and because I have the ribbon guide sewing attachment on, it's going to guide my ribbon to the proper position. I can even unplug my foot control and use the start stop button, and it's just going to feed it in for me. So I don't even have to be at my machine to sew it out. It's just going to keep feeding it until I tell it to stop. So let's go ahead and stitch it out now. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial on the ribbon sewing guide attachment. I hope you have seen how easy it is and how fun it can be to label all of your projects, from quilts to bags to even clothes that you already own that you just want to make sure that don't get lost and they come back to you. Because remember, we want to label the work that we make. Otherwise, we're not going to get credit for all that hard work that we've done. Thanks so much for watching, and you guys have a great day.